The Whitehead Torpedo. When Austrian naval authorities first showed British engineer Robert Whitehead the new torpedo, invented by Captain Luppis, he had difficulty in containing his amusement. The torpedo consisted of a small clockwork-driven boat with a small powder charge in the bow. Its course was determined by long, light lines attached at the boat's steering gear, controlled at the other end by a shore-bound sailor. "I don't think the device warrants further development," said Whitehead. He then went to his factory and produced a torpedo that revolutionised warfare. Robert Whitehead designed and built the first accurate power-driven torpedo, which hit the world with the impact of the atom bomb. It was a turning point in naval history. The torpedo gave teeth to the submarine, which, without it, would have remained a costly, unreliable toy. In 2 world wars, the torpedo sent millions of tons of shipping plunging to the bottom and made starvation by blockade a reality it had never been before. Warships had to be redesigned to meet the menace. Naval strategy completely changed. Robert Whitehead, who invented the killer weapon of the sea for his employers, the Austrians, sold rights to all bidders, including his native England. Most countries loaded him with honours. From the land of his birth, its ships bristling with torpedoes, he received no decoration or honour. Robert Whitehead was born at Mount Pleasant, Bolton, Lancashire, on January 3, 1823, one of a family of 8 of James Whitehead, owner of a prosperous bleaching business. James Whitehead was a typical hard-headed Lancashire businessman. Despite his brass, he brought up his children without frills. Young Robert went to local schools with the middle-class small fry of the teeming cotton mill population. In those days, the mechanic and the engineer were kings. Britain's industrial revolution was booming to the climax that made Britain the workshop of the world. It was the age of quick-fire invention. At 14, young Robert was apprenticed to Richard Ormond and Son, engineers of Manchester, where his uncle, William Smith, was manager. Smith put him through every department and then sent him on with construction gangs. Twice a week, young Whitehead went to night classes at the Mechanics' Institute, where he emerged as a skilled draftsman. The world then was not only clamouring for British goods, but also for British brains. Every European country encouraged Englishmen to set up works in leading manufacturing towns in the hope of capturing some of Britain's booming prosperity. Thus the firm of Philip Taylor and Sons sprang up in Marseille. They appointed Whitehead's uncle William Smith as works manager. As soon as Robert Whitehead was out of his apprenticeship, Smith sent for him. Philip Taylor and Son did not work quickly enough for him. They were cautious and conservative. After 2 years, the frustrated Whitehead resigned. In 1847, the sign Robert Whitehead, Engineer, appeared in Milan, centre of the Italian silk, cotton and heavy industries. Robert Whitehead sprang to the front at once with a revolutionary machine for weaving silk. He rose higher in public regard when he invented machinery to drain the Lombardy marshes and throw more fertile acres open to cultivation. At 25, Robert Whitehead was already on the way to a fortune. Unfortunately for him, northern Italy was seething with rebellion against the Austrian overlords. The whole north exploded in 1848 when the enraged populations of Milan, Venice and other centres fell on the Austrian garrisons. In Milan, Austrians were hunted through the streets. Casualties in killed and wounded totalled more than 5,000. Milan, gloating too soon, for the Austrians were to crush the city under a ruthless tyranny, set up a provisional government. One of its first acts was to annul all patents granted by the Austrians. If the resurgent Italians did not appreciate Whitehead, the Austrians did. Within days they had induced him to pull down his sign and move to the Austrian port of Trieste, where he became manager of the Austrian Lloyd Company. Though only 26, the Austrians recognised him as one of the most brilliant engineering brains in the world, which is why, in 1856, a group of wealthy industrialists asked him to develop a great naval shipyard at the neighbouring Austro-Hungarian port of Fiume. Whitehead built up the great Stabilimento Tecnico Firmano works, where he built and powered several Austrian warships, including the ironclad Ferdinand Max. When Italy revolted again in her relentless march to liberation, Ferdinand Max rammed and sank an Italian warship. Emperor Franz Joseph was so delighted that he summoned Whitehead to court and personally presented him with a diamond ring. By 1864, Austrian naval authorities went automatically to Robert Whitehead with all of their engineering problems. He had an expert knack of telling at a glance what ideas were practicable. Meanwhile, an Austrian naval tactician, Captain Lappis, had been dreaming of a weapon that could be directed from a distance silently and secretly against enemy shipping. He produced a small boat propelled by clockwork with a special compartment for explosives in the bows. Long lines attached to the rudder, manipulated by a sailor on shore or in a boat, would steer it to its target. The authorities took the idea to Robert Whitehead. Without hesitation, he rejected it. The crude contraption, however, set Robert Whitehead on the trail of the most venomous sea weapon of all time. For some weeks he turned the idea for a workable torpedo over in his mind. As the idea took shape, he called in his son. Month after month they toiled over drawing boards, solving technical problems. When they called in a trusted mechanic in a locked room of the Stablamento works, the first cigar-shaped torpedo took form. Toward the end of 1866 it was ready for testing. The torpedo was constructed of steel. It was 14 inches in diameter. It weighed 300 pounds and carried 18 pounds of dynamite in the warhead. It was driven by compressed air. Before Austrian government chiefs and Navy brass hats, Whitehead sent his first torpedo to sea from a standing start on the surface. It made heavy going for a few hundred yards and 4 or 5 knots, then sank. Try as they would, they could not recover it. Whitehead did not mind. He had proved his idea would work. He built a second torpedo. It ran 700 yards at 7 knots. It still lacked precision and was difficult to maintain at uniform depth. It proved beyond doubt, however, that a terrifying new weapon had exploded on naval warfare. Whitehead now had no time for anything but his torpedo. He concentrated solely on the problem of depth control. This he solved with a pendulum weight and a hydrostatic valve so linked with horizontal rudders that they automatically corrected any deviation in balance or depth. With this improvement, Whitehead again demonstrated his torpedo before Austrian officials, launching it from the gunboat Gemse. Austria at once bought rights to manufacture it. Not being a maritime nation, she did not demand exclusive rights, which, if sold to a naval power, would have made it invincible. In 1870, Whitehead went to England to demonstrate the torpedo to brass hats of the Royal Navy off Sheerness. As usual, Navy diehards were not greatly impressed by the newfangled notion. 2 years passed before the British government decided to buy the rights of manufacture for the small sum of £4,000. Not many years passed, however, before all nations realised that Whitehead had produced a war-winning weapon. They raced to buy. Germany and Italy were not far behind England. Within 30 years, the Whitehead torpedo was being manufactured or sold in practically every country in Europe, the United States, China, Japan, and some South American republics. With his son-in-law, Count George Hoyos, Whitehead bought complete control of the Stablamento works, rebuilt them on a larger scale, and turned them over to the exclusive manufacture of torpedoes. He established a branch of the firm at Portland Harbour, England. All his time he spent on building bigger and better torpedoes till they made 18 knots over 600 yards, 24 knots over 1,000 yards, and finally 36 knots over 4,000 yards. He devised means of firing them above or below the surface from the fastest ships, no matter the speed or bearing of the enemy. Still, however, there were occasional deviations from course. These were eliminated when Austrian inventor Ludwig Obrey designed a small-weighted wheel or gyroscope which acted on vertical rudders and steered a deflected torpedo back to its course. Slowly, naval strategy changed under the impact of the torpedo. Fleets of speedy torpedo boats were built. Warships were more heavily armoured and divided into watertight compartments. For the first time, submarines had teeth. U-boats began to slip from the stocks in increasing numbers. Organised death now lurked in the depths. With his torpedo nearing perfection, wealthy Robert Whitehead returned to England. He bought a farm in Sussex and spent a small fortune developing it into a modern holding. In 1891, a Chilean gunboat sank the insurgent battleship Blanco Encalade with a torpedo. In 1894, a Brazilian insurgent battleship was sunk in the same manner. Japanese torpedo boats sank 4 Chinese ships in Whitehead harbour in the Sino-Japanese War of 1895. The Japanese used the torpedo with devastating effect in their attack on Russian ships at Port Arthur in 1904. All this was nothing compared with the submarine horror of World War I, when torpedoes sent 3,500,000 tons of shipping to the bottom in 1917 alone. Whitehead did not live to see the final venom of the monster he created. He died on November 14, 1905. His home was full of decorations from Prussia, Denmark, Portugal, Italy, Greece, France and Turkey. There was not one tribute from his native country.